in Ottertail County, and this is one of our quarterly events we typically hold for to share information about opportunities to support projects or funding resources, and we'll be focusing predominantly on some updates for Minnesota housing and the new local government funding programs that are going to be coming available next year through Minnesota Housing, as well as a program that's open right now to help support projects. And then we'll do a project highlight for just sharing an example of how we've been involved as the community development agency, and kind of highlight that project as well. So sorry, we'll get to that agenda I just walked through for folks. Certainly we'll have time for Q&A and discussion, and if you have questions during any of the presentation today, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will make sure they get addressed as well. So hopefully not new for most of the folks on the call, but Ottertail County has been working to advance housing investment throughout the county for a number of years now through the Big Build initiative. There's 4 primary action areas that we orient our work towards. Number 1 being, of course, increasing the construction of new housing units throughout the county to meet the needs of various residents and household types and what that might look like. And to do that, a big piece of what we do is work to build partnerships, expand capacity of our private development partners, our nonprofits, our cities, et cetera, so that we can work together on addressing solutions to the challenge. We also do a lot of work in seeking funding opportunities, which will be a discussion today. As mentioned in the agenda, there are some new programs coming out specific for local governments to access to support housing in their communities. So we'll get some updates from Minnesota Housing on those programs. And then we also do advocate for funding. So some of these programs are things that we have spoken in support of as a county in helping address the challenges and barriers to getting new housing either constructed or invested in within Ottertail County. So today's topics align well with those actions, and we try to stay aligned with them. So jumping right in, so I mentioned Minnesota Housing. There will be a number of programs launching in 2025. This is the list straight from their website. Minnesota Housing did host a webinar just on Tuesday. So this is updated information as of Tuesday that they had shared out with various partners and to get those updates out of where they're at. These programs are predominantly a result of a major investment from the Minnesota legislature back in 2023. And new funding was allocated and designated to support housing. And as mentioned, some of these programs are specific for local government, and that was new for Minnesota Housing. They'd had various funding programs and financing tools available, but they hadn't been geared solely towards local governments. And so what that did is help them think about that there should be a team that is supporting, us as local governments, as counties, cities, et cetera, to support housing. So they've been working to establish a new division in the department in Minnesota Housing as an agency. And again, the programs have taken a bit to come out, but we're excited to see progress here coming in 2025. So we'll talk through a couple of them that are more applicable for our communities and Ottertail County, and some are more on our side, the agency side. So here's kind of a start of the program timelines that were shared on that webinar. So one that I'll talk about today in a little more depth is that first one listed, and that's kind of a title that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we'll talk about what that means. But Tier 2 cities, it's a grant program, and actually today, this afternoon, the program guide, or the guidelines for that program, are being presented to Minnesota Housing's board of directors. So that's their board meeting was today, and so that is happening, and that's the first step. Get the guidelines approved, and then as you'll see lower or farther down in this timeline, we'll talk about launching that program. The second one that I'll talk more in depth about today is the infrastructure grant program. And that one is anticipated to have those guidelines brought before the Minnesota Housing Board next month. So that's kind of their final step of getting the program approved. And then as we go into the next timeline chart here, looking at first quarter of next year to have both that infrastructure and the Tier 2 cities grants open up for expressing intent to apply, so having a project to apply for, and then the RFP itself would be opened up in first quarter 2025 with applications due in the second quarter. As always, we will share out these slides after, so you don't need to take notes on this. And then we'll also, the webinar recording will be available for anyone who wants to dig in deeper to any of the other programs as well. All right, so the Greater Minnesota Tier 2 Cities Housing Aid Grants. That's a long title. And to step back a little, in 2023, going back to when initially these funds were designated, all counties and cities over 10,000 have been receiving a formula aid. So based on a number of factors within that geography, there's a dollar amount that's calculated and has been distributed to, again, counties and cities in Greater Minnesota over 10,000. So that has been happening. We at Ottertail County do have those funds. Yeah. Nope, not talking to me. Okay. So we get those twice a year at the county. We've been using them for, we have one project that we've dedicated those funds to, and we'll continue to get those. So for those communities under 10,000, there will be a competitive grant application process coming out next year. And as all of our communities in Ottertail County, other than Fergus Falls, fall into that category. So the next slide will talk about the eligible projects, but again, they're looking at $100,000 to $300,000 for the awards in this program. And there's about $4.5 million over 2 years available in that pot of money. So what can it be used for? Don't worry about the acronyms and some of the other stuff, but it is for, construction, rehab, financing, a lot of different ways that the funds could be used in a project. It is geared towards individuals or households that are, from an ownership perspective, that fall into an income category of 115% of the area median income, and for rental at 80% of area median income. Those are pretty common income criteria for programs through Minnesota Housing. We'll see those same income components talked about through another program as well. And it also aligns with tax increment financing. So those who are working in development projects know it takes a layering of resources to make projects happen these days. And so it is good that they have that consistency of across income requirements so that you can layer these programs together if it works out. All right. So again, just doing a very high level review of these programs. We'll have information about how to get to the program pages themselves and look at more details in the slide deck when we send it out. But the second one I wanted to talk about is the infrastructure grants for housing. So this program will provide up to 50% of the cost for public infrastructure for eligible housing projects. And here they're taking a broader approach and calling it workforce housing. But generally, we kind of follow those same income, what does workforce housing contemplate? And generally, it's housing that's affordable for the general workforce population within a community. And so that can vary depending on the types of industry and the employment needs within a community. So not a strict definition there, but these funds could be accessed for multifamily or single family. And looking at, maybe $500,000 for applications, but there is only $8 million statewide within Greater Minnesota available in this program. And so that will be a highly competitive program. But we do want to remind folks, and hopefully folks know, that there is the program through us at the county for infrastructure match money. So we have a program that allows for up to $100,000 for public infrastructure associated with housing. We have funded 3 projects through that program to date, but we want to, it was envisioned because we knew this program was coming, and we're still requiring, if it has a match, or how can we be more competitive when we're looking at these programs on a statewide basis. So if we're able to contribute for an eligible project $100,000 into that, hopefully for applications, we'd be more successful in Ottertail County. The county's infrastructure funding does not have an income component to it, but it does need to be matched as well. So that is available, and want to make sure people are keeping that in mind. All right, so again, quick snapshots of just a couple of the programs, but those that are probably hopefully most applicable to projects in Ottertail County. But we want folks to start thinking about, as we get into Q1, Q2 of next year, that we are ready for applications from communities within Ottertail County. So that means identifying those projects now, because it is going to take some legwork. They will be looking at readiness, at the viability, and just having the partnerships and what that's going to look like. So depending on the type of project, but having that budget, understanding what is the cost of the project, getting that preliminary engineering if it's an infrastructure project, getting some construction cost numbers if it's a physical housing project, and then what would be realistic timelines for getting them up and running. So just knowing what that's going to look like. Working to build partnerships, collaborations, certainly our employers are big partners that we want to have on board, helping to inform what does this housing look like to meet the needs of their workforce and their future workforce or unmet workforce needs. And certainly developers, making sure we're being realistic with what's being proposed, and other agencies, other partners. Who else can be at the table to help strengthen an application, bring some other component to creating more competitive or ready applications. The other part is really to understand the programs, and we can help with that. We're not experts on them. They are new programs, but we also can help bridge those communications to Minnesota Housing. Understanding who is eligible. Does it have to be a city? Can it be the county? Can it be a joint application? Just what does that look like? Are there required matching funds, and what types of funds can be considered matching into these programs? And then I mentioned it earlier, but how do they layer together? How can you effectively leverage more than one program, and just understanding eligibility and requirements of the various funding sources. Again, we can help with those conversations and try to essentially guide a project or a program and or an opportunity to see what it might best be suited for from a funding source standpoint. All right, so I'm going to pause there. We do have contact information, the website where the local government housing programs are held. And again, that'll bring you to the page that has those list of programs that I showed on our first slide. There's program information. You can also sign up for email updates on these programs to get direct information from Minnesota Housing. There will also be a link to the presentation and the slide deck from that webinar just on Tuesday. So that will be posted to that page as well. If you weren't able to join that, there was some good information and certainly more depth to what I just talked about as well. All right. Before we go on to another Minnesota housing program, but not related to local housing, is there any questions or
Amy,
initial?
there's a question in the chat from Greg
There.
Collins from Steenerson about how
Yep.
can local lumber yards get involved?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Greg. So I think being talking to the communities, because the programs we talked about are for governments to apply for, but if there's any partner, at any point of that development process, so whether it's the lumber yard, um, you know, just being at the table and whatever that partnership might look like is usually project specific, but I think just making sure people are aware that whether it's Steenerson or another group wants to be a partner. I think communicating again with the local cities um, and just making sure that relationship is there now, so that as a project might develop, they know they can and have Steenerson at the table. Right. Other questions on these programs? And if they pop up again, yeah, drop them in the chat, or we'll have time at the end as well for open discussion as well. All right, so changing gears to something we can do today to help housing projects. And so this is a relatively new program that has been made available at the state of Minnesota. And it is a tax credit for individuals or businesses who make a contribution towards housing, and I'll talk more about what that means. And then the person who contributes would receive a state tax credit. So it's in the form of 85% of the contribution. So to kind of go through a bit of some of the nuts and bolts, and we took this information straight from Minnesota Housing, so we're making sure we're expressing it. We did invite the program manager from this program to join us today, but she was not able to. So we're kind of sharing information on their behalf. So thinking about if you want to support, again, a project, and this falls into the same income components or income criteria for that ownership or rental that we talked about. So if I wanted to make a donation to support housing, and I could do that, because I'm a person in Minnesota who has a state tax obligation. So a credit would help when I file my taxes. But both individuals and businesses who pay Minnesota taxes and have that tax obligation are eligible to contribute. The minimum is $1,000. If you've made that minimum contribution, you would get a tax credit back, a certificate that would give you $850 credit on your tax obligation when you file your taxes. So that's the basic mechanics. The contributions that you would make can be either put into a general pool of projects, so meaning then they open that up for applicants. We actually applied as the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for a project into that general allocation pool. So it might, if we're successful, we would get funding towards a project that contributors had generally put into this fund. The other way is to have it go to a qualified project, and I'll talk about those in a bit. So in that application or contribution process, you could designate a qualified project that has been put forward through the program. So I'll talk about qualified projects in a minute, but just to go through a little bit more on what types of projects could be supported through this program. And it really is looking for new housing or rehabilitation of that low and moderate income household. Same income components that I mentioned earlier. One thing to note is that a contributor to the fund, either that business or an individual, cannot be directly involved in that project. And there's some other disqualifications because it's not a tool to invest into your own project. So you have to be a contributor. It's kind of on the outside of the project. There's a lot of information about how that looks and how it works on the website, which we'll get that link to. So mentioned designated contributions. So here in Ottertail County, their habitat area, Fergus Falls Habitat for Humanity has designated 3 projects that are designated for contributions. And I see Stan just popped his face up, I think. So I'll give you some time here. I'll kind of quickly walk through it, Stan. So these projects are available. There's a link right there to look at those. And habitats across the state are some of the biggest, is the biggest pool of projects it works well with the habitat model for this program. So those are opportunities to contribute. And I'll give Stan a time. Looks like you're driving, Stan. Be safe.
I am. I'm very careful though. Hey, so there's a $10 million credit limit per year, and this year it really didn't take off. It was the first full year. I think they're at somewhere around $3 million in contributions. There's a lot of room to grow in this, and it's going to go on for the next 4 years through 2028. Right now, it's sunsetted after that. I know people like Amy are working on getting it extended, but that's a legislature issue. Just to give people an idea, since August when we started, we've raised, people have contributed over $100,000 to our 2 projects.
Wow.
And so we're actually hiring a 4T creative marketing company in Fergus to help us get the word out, because there's a lot of upside and everybody pays state taxes. This way you can direct it local. I mean, for $150 that it's really going to cost you, you can give $1,000 towards a project. So I'm hoping that everybody, we just sent a blast out to the chamber today, so people might have got that. The other interesting thing for banks, banks, you can give up to $2 million in this program. Okay. A bank last year in St. Paul gave $1 million, but it counts for CRA credit. So that's a kind of an important thing for some of the bigger banks, the Credit Reinvestment Act. We haven't had any luck with that yet, but we think that there might be some bigger donations out there if we get the word out. That's all I got.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dan. So for those who don't know Stan, who might be on the call, he is the executive director of the Fergus Falls Area Habitat for Humanity. So, great opportunity to support local housing, have those contributions come locally. There's some preliminary conversations on other projects that might get posted as for designated contributions. One caution, and Habitat, that's why this works well for Habitat, because they're very planful for their projects. But say, Amy's development company puts a project on here, a 100-unit multifamily project, just making up a situation, and then I'm not able to pull together the whole project, and you had contributed, designated your contribution towards that project. If it doesn't move forward, your contribution is not refundable, and it goes into that general allocation pool. So it still goes towards housing, but it could be anywhere across the state of Minnesota that it goes towards. So just to make that note, and again, Habitat is very planful and mindful, and that's why, again, it works well for Habitat projects, because they are already, really ready for these projects to move forward and accept those contributions. So like Stan said, if you make $1,000 contribution, as long as you have that tax obligation that you can use that credit towards when you file your taxes, your out of pocket is actually $150. So it works well for those that it works for, and check it out. Again, we'll send the slide deck out so you can look at the links that we've provided on here. Also, I am not a tax advisor. I am not an expert on any of these programs. These aren't programs we run, so we are just sharing information. To learn more, we encourage you to go to the program website for this program as well. There's a great about 20-minute video that Chrissy Mills, who's noted here as the contact point, has put together, and it really covers both a lot of the different angles. So whether you're a contributor or you have a project that you want to put forward and solicit contributions for, it covers a wide range of those kind of FAQs. And there is a whole FAQ section as well. And then if you do have questions, Christy is really helpful at Minnesota Housing and is really leading this program. A note for this year for contributions, the deadline is December 6th. And so there's still a few weeks left or a couple weeks left to get a contribution in for this tax year. And then it resets next year with that new allocation. Anything that isn't claimed or leveraged this year does roll forward. So there is for the subsequent years anyway that the program is available. All right, that's it for State Housing Tax Credit Program. Any questions or anything else from Habitat to share on its experience with the program?
There was a couple questions from Ted Christensen in the chat.
Okay, yeah.
Is there a preference for single family homes versus multifamily apartments?
Sure. For the tax credit program, is that when the question came in?
Yeah, yep.
There isn't. I mean, it's it's where the program it works for both. So you could do both as long as you meet those income criteria for either home ownership or rental. So I don't think there's a preference. It's if you established had a project and had a gap in it and needed the funding and it meets those income criteria, I would say put it out there, and private developers can access these funds. So I probably didn't make that clear. This is a program if so Habitat as a nonprofit, or it can be a for-profit developer. It could be us as the Housing and Redevelopment Authority through the county, different agencies and eligibility for who can access the funds. It's pretty broad as long as you meet those income criteria and other qualifications.
And then his second question, oh, sorry, Ted clarified. First question, so the one we just answered was actually for the infrastructure funding. So going back, sorry, Ted.
Yeah, sorry, and I can't see the Q&A when I'm sharing my screen. So, so to the other, for the infrastructure grant program, there is preference to an area or community that is cost burdened. So where the residents are really paying more than their incomes, the standard kind of housing cost that they should be, that's kind of that benchmark of 30%. So if you have an area that is designated as cost burdened, which we have that data, that's a preference. As far as the type of housing, I don't think there's that, they don't have the full program guidelines out yet for that program. They'll come out next month. But I haven't heard of a multifamily versus single family preference.
Okay, and then other question was, again from Ted, how do I get my project or development on the list that investors would contribute to?
Yeah, so this link here, it's Minnesota Housing Partnership, mhponline.org. So this link is what would get you to the project page or to register a project on there. And then, so there's a searchable page that you can, then you would show up, and then that links into the contribution page from Minnesota Housing. So MHP is a nonprofit, and they're just providing the service because Minnesota Housing didn't want to manage, I guess, the funds, the designated projects for contributions. So, but they are connected, the two pages. So this would be the page to go to both look for projects and to get your own project listed. Okay, other questions?
That was all in the chat for right now.
All right. Okay, and sorry, I should have warned everyone at the front end that I was going to be talking through the duration of this session today. All right, on to our third kind of primary item, which was a project example. And so we have been working with the City of Battle Lake on a multifamily workforce project, or the vision for it. the Community Development Agency at the county acquired a site and has demoed and readied the site for redevelopment. And now we're partnering with a developer who is purchasing the property and will develop the 10-unit project. So construction is expected to start yet this year. I think, you know, it said fall, but now it says winter because we turned to winter this week. So the construction is still expected to start yet this year. So I'll go through a little more context of that process, but wanted to just kind of lay out the basics. And then this is where the property is located. It's about a half-acre site. The red line through the middle is Highway 78 in Battle Lake, so just a half block off that. On the south side of the aerial photo is the new the Hatchery apartment project, mixed use project there. So just to give some spatial reference of where we're looking at here. And then this is the project as it's proposed. Again, a small, quite a small site. And so fitting it in and managing stormwater are things that, you know, have been worked on, but it is a 3-story building, a tuck under garage on kind of the back side, and then units on the 4 units on the first floor, and then 4 units. Nope, that doesn't add up. But anyway, units on each floor. It's a 10-unit building total. All right, so kind of walking through that timeline a little bit of when this came to be, and there was a property with a blighted structure. It really was not rehabable or usable anymore. It had met its unfortunate life end of life use. So there was a willing seller who owned that property. They had initially had a project plan for it that would have demolished that structure as well, but they ended up shifting their project to a different location in Battle Lake. So the property became available. And so in fall of 2023, the Community Development Agency purchased the property. We did some asbestos abatement and demolished the structure. So it got to a clear site, and then did a developer solicitation and application to a Minnesota housing program. And again, we'll walk through this in a little more detail as well, but moving ahead with that project this year in 2024, and then expect occupancy in late 2025. So as I mentioned, the city, the opportunity was kind of identified by the city with that willing seller. The city had proactively included this parcel in a redevelopment tax increment financing district, knowing that that might help with the redevelopment of the site in the future, not knowing what that might be. So we worked with the CDA, or the CDA worked with the city and its EDA to reaffirm what was the vision for this site, and housing was identified, and then they kind of drilled down to multifamily housing with that gear towards the workforce, how to meet needs of the workforce, and knowing the other types of housing products that had been built in the last several years, what kind of vacancy rates they were looking at, and that was where it landed. So as mentioned, the CDA purchased it, got the site cleared, and then issued a request for developer interest in late 2023. We weren't going to be prescriptive of what was to be built on the site. So looking for the developer's vision for what could fit on it, what they kind of in their own market analysis felt could work, but leaning towards that workforce housing. So multifamily workforce was kind of the parameter of what was laid out in that request for developer interest. And so out of that, the CDA and the city entered into a memorandum of understanding with High Point Homes in February of 2024. So with that developer partner identified, we kind of refined the site plan a bit, looked at the stormwater management needs, some of the other, setback and zoning requirements to kind of get to that site plan that I shared earlier, and really affirmed what type of housing, would meet the needs of of the workforce and talking to the area employers. What were they hearing from their workforce? Who wasn't able to find housing that they had heard about, and kind of really refined it back to, what were those workforce barriers to find housing in the community, knowing that if you get that worker to come and live where they are working, they're going to be more likely to stay at that employment. So with kind of the project in mind, it was aligned towards a Minnesota housing program that's called Workforce Housing. It's a multifamily program. And so developed an application back in April of 2024 and ultimately was awarded $495,000 to support the project just in late September. So that is in the form of a forgivable loan. So as long as the project is built and it does what it said it was going to do as far as units and primary type of housing style, et cetera, that loan is forgiven. And so that's how the funding comes into the project. So where are we today? So we have a closing on the land scheduled for next week or sooner if everything comes together. The land is being sold for the assessed value, and then construction is still planned to start yet this year as soon as everything can be pulled together. We just got the signed agreement from Minnesota Housing Monday, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. So it's all coming together. Wish things moved a little faster, but that's where we're at. So I've kind of talked about the site design, but again, the 10 units, mix of 2 and 3 bedrooms, in-unit washer dryer. If you saw in the rendering of the project, there's the tuck under garages that I mentioned, and then on-site parking also surrounding it. And making that work. There'll be certainly an elevator in the unit, so accessible, and really looking at that more of a potential family household option. So how did this come together? And those who are involved in projects know the costs are not going down, but so the developer does have a traditional mortgage, a mortgage on that's been secured for it and is bringing owner equity into the project. But that isn't enough to build the project based on today's construction market. So mentioned the workforce housing funding from Minnesota Housing, and then also through one of our financing options, we have a multifamily gap loan, which is a 0% loan that we are also contributing into the project. That loan will be paid by the future taxes that the project generates. So through that tax increment financing district, that will be supporting the repayment of the loan back to the community development agency. So, bringing a lot of tools to the table, but I'm excited to see this project move forward and really meet the needs of the community and continue to expand the housing options and opportunities. So we're selling the land for the assessed value that I mentioned. We also do have our costs for the asbestos remediation and demolition, and we'll also be recouping those through the future taxes generated by the project. So we fronted the money, and then we'll be getting that back over time as well. Great, and that's it on that project. Did want to just highlight an open house that we're having on a housing success, hopefully, story here. So in Dalton, through our Housing and Redevelopment Authority, we've built 2 triplexes that will be open for the community to visit tomorrow between 1:30 and 3:30. Those units are just finishing construction, and we'll have tenants moving in. These are senior affordable units for 55 plus. They are, I think we've rented, I think 3 are fully secured, but certainly if you know folks who are interested, you can reach out to our office and we can get the application form out for that. So we're really excited for that project. So if you're interested in learning more about that or seeing the units, stop by tomorrow. And then, we have a variety of programs, so just don't forget to always reach out to us, whether it's a program we have, or we might know about something that could be a fit to help help a project move forward or fill a gap that might exist, or help from down payment assistance or things like that. There's resources for folks to get into housing. And then always you can reach out to myself for Tanya Westra, our housing program supervisor. She's on the call today as well as other staff. So that's it for our prepared information. I'll stop sharing. And if folks have questions, we can take those. Let's see, there's some pieces in the chat here maybe. Oh, sorry, Jay, I didn't know you were on the call. Do you have anything else to add? Please feel free to do so. Questions? Tanya, anything else to add that I missed?
I think that was it.
All right, well, staff will stay on here. Oh, timeline. Sure, so Jordan, I see your question there, asking the timeline for the city to connect with the county on a project. And I think awareness early is good because projects can often take different directions and sometimes different challenges. And then thinking about the lead time for some of the applications. So, I mentioned the workforce housing application that was submitted, that was due at the end of April. We were awarded at the end of September, or the city of Battle Lake was awarded. And then, we didn't get the paperwork until this week signed. And that means the developer can't start construction until then. And so we're at this point in time. So, and just knowing, so if it does need a Minnesota housing program to support it or is trying to secure that, the more time, the better to look at application cycles and understand timelines, because other ones we've applied for it, it can be 9 months. You're usually applying in the summer for a project that may not start until the next summer. So the lead times are important from that. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, well, staff will stay on if there are questions, but otherwise feel free to drop off and we'll follow up with an email with more information. Thanks, everyone.